Well, that's the thing, because my job now is kind of, well, obviously acting and that kind of stuff, but then I'm pitching a lot. So I'll pitch movies. And every executive is like, yeah, but why should we make this movie now? And you're like, because it's funny.
Yeah.
Because it's funny.
What do you mean?
Let's talk about comedy. A thing everyone knows and agrees is beautiful and important, but not that important, more like something that should probably be included to ensure a profitable movie-going, vlog-going, sponsorship-going experience. How many lovely films have you seen with generic actors saying generic lines and generic plot? OMG, now Jen plus Eric are forever eternally together. But first, she had to learn through hilarious dress and makeup montage that women are women, despite him already knowing that boys will be boys. They set sail on their honeymoon cruise, but oh no, some random real-world development prevents the writers from achieving the 4 hours of sleep necessary to avoid including the gripping half-an-hour-long liar revealed storyline. Each half of the beautiful couple walks in opposite directions across the deck until finally she full-on sprints back into his arms, and together they both harmlessly make fun of how clumsily she runs and how full they are from flawless, politically palatable dinner, and how little they'll sleep as they pointlessly try to overcome their mutual tragic infertility we only just found out about 2 scenes before. And everything revolves around the magical, invisible eyes of the audience watching 2 years in the future. Every word has been catch more flies with honey laundered through focus groups selected routinely like enthusiastic soon-to-be gazillionaire Price is Right audiences. Every screenshot has been run through 5 editing softwares and checked to ensure no one Twitter user would publicly cite it as evidence that some 20th century manifesto came true. Every sappy, awkwardly sunset-painted backdrop reminds you to violently, temporarily laugh at the sly, mischievous glances shared at almost all points in time by all characters on screen. Every second, there's some new, safe, happy reason to contentedly lose faith in the reality of the moment. Every day, 5 more gut and blockbusting cinematic riots are released to unanimous, 100% fresh consensuses. And the cycle continues. Laugh and laugh at the hilarious, unnerving, inevitable ending in which no one dies and everyone righteously stands up in the Erewhon line for poetic justice, social equality, correctly sourced organic kefir. Laugh and laugh while always forever knowing that something about all of this, in fact, inorganic slop is wrong. Where'd all the comedy go? Who stole it? All you know is that it was there a second ago. Those enlightened podcasters were right. They've always been right that something is missing from the tired, divorced, overpaid Hollywood writer's room. Wow, this is just terrible. If I were you, I'd listen to people who aren't afraid to say anything so I'd know what to do. And weirdly enough, I keep hearing how those Hollywood execs are lazy and out of touch and don't know what real comedy is from some supplement-selling text and dropshipping savant who agrees that COD lobby squeakers should all have the pass. I keep hearing Joe Rogan laugh at those insane blue-haired crybabies, and also Joe Rogan consistently failing to understand basic sarcasm or subtlety. I keep textually screaming indecipherable nothingness on every platform at all times, and when criticized, I keep retroactively defending my well-developed, well-reasoned position that indecipherable nothingness is actually just highbrow satire. So, what do I do about the problem that comedy is dead and everyone I don't agree with killed it? How do I solve the terrible dilemma that everyone's too easily irritated these days, but they keep telling me to be quiet, stop being a dumbass, which is irritating? How do I finally censor the stupid comedy censors? I'm stuck laughing at things that aren't funny and furiously, endlessly typing to people who are. Like everyone who disagrees with me, I'm trapped looking for a way to seriously escape my unserious situation. And that's the real unfortunate reason that comedy is dead, that no one and everyone killed it. The obsessive both sides search for a theoretical, action-based political answer to the unnecessary, abstract, weird question, how do we fix comedy? One side wants to return to the anarchic nothing burger stereotype economy of pre-2010s movies, TV shows, podcasts, YouTube videos, and another side wants to follow some vague but also really precise theory that says comedy should follow a rigid, morbid checklist of legal language and diversity quotas. Both sides are obsessively screaming at each other that comedy was never meant to be how the other side wants it. And to be real, both sides are right about that last part. And one side's honestly just winning the comedy war because the position it's pushing is technically closer to what seems like the right answer. Why do you think it's so easy to mindlessly doom binge hour-long YouTube, TikTok, SJW-owned compilations? Comedy laid out in some meticulous, philosophically determined, codified set of rules can never succeed because it's definitionally by the book and bland. The corporate, Hollywood, pearl-clutching, careful, safe, cookie-cutter version of comedy is failing to interest more and more people as it spirals forever into self-congratulatory nothingness. When any of these safe space people enter the real world, their spineless, too complicated, self-contradictory obsession with political correctness collapses in on itself and they instantly sink to the ground, despairing at the brutal honesty they're so bluntly and uncomfortably experiencing, while keeping one eye open, hoping their operatic performance of a lifetime will result in surprise, unreciprocated visits from the matte packaging, unsalted snack fairy. But, and you might not believe this, they're still not the biggest problem here. These misguided fake empaths are weak, but I know a group that's way weaker. The other side of the comedy war is full of desperate, posturing, underconfident, insecure chat spammers who wear down the pearl clutchers using insults and doomerism, repetition, and schizo posting. They know the dumb and capable pearl clutchers are generally unable to emotionally handle harsh and frustrating language, so the doomerist schizo posters use as much of that language as possible. It's all about ruining the pearl clutchers' days every day, so they can continue to say as much crazy, water-mudding, discourse-ruining nothingness as possible in all cases, faces, and avoid considering how pathetic their eternal plan to ruin everyone else's comedy forever really is. They have nothing outside of Twitter validation and juicy rage bait caricatures passed off forever as real comedy only intellectuals would understand. If the dumbass pearl clutchers eternally ignored the dumbass rage bait spammers, the latter would instantly disappear. But the pretentious pearl clutchers aren't smart enough to avoid getting offended, so the war continues. Funny. There's just something comedic about the comedy war, about two sides misunderstanding what comedy is forever, pretending laughter should be had according to no rules at all or every rule in the book. Like I said, philosophically, the doomerist rage bait spammers are actually closer to the answer because they acknowledge that comedy can't be contained by rigid social rules. It's just true that it can't be. There's no perfect line between a joke that's funny and a joke that isn't. No joke that would for sure offend or not offend every single possible audience at once. But in reality, I'd guess that most pearl clutchers are in fact not really that pearl clutchy at all. That most of them just want to make sure dumb, boring stereotyping humor doesn't stay as prevalent as it once was. And similarly, while the doomerist schizo posters are generally convinced that comedy is dead and pearl clutchers killed it, something tells me that a lot of them do still have limits, that most would be okay with avoiding topics that probably wouldn't or couldn't be touched upon anyway. Topics that a new stand-up comic might struggle to navigate without knowing rules of thumb for treating an audience with respect. As usual, loud dumbasses are probably the issue, and the comedy war is most likely just happening on Twitter between high schoolers, the terminally online, and terminally online high schoolers. So in that case, why does it still feel like comedy is dead? Of course, it's probably just the extreme pearl clutchers and rage-bait schizo posters are both still desperately clinging to whatever abstract, untenable theory or non-theory they want to seriously enforce around a thing as unserious as comedy. Yes, the pearl clutchers really are misguided and keep making safe, uninteresting, entirely milquetoast shows and movies and ad campaigns forever. But just as many doomerist schizo posters are intentionally malicious, purposely provoking the pearl clutchers so comedy can stay political and functionally entirely unhinged in every situation, deliberately attempting to ensure no conversation about comedy can include two sides respectful of each other's positions, poisoning every debate and acting in bad faith so it's likely no common ground will ever be reached. Comedy stays dead, and the rage bait schizo posters are vengefully happy they've ruined any chance at its revival. Now the pearl clutchers are blamed for being cringe, and the schizo posters can keep ridiculing them forever. Pearl clutchers' exaggerated offense at everything is weaponized against them, used to justify entirely blaming their misguided desire to please everyone for the slow, subtle death of modern comedy. So, the narrative that pearl clutching is the catastrophic end of modern comedy is generally just a not-so-subtle, intentional, rhetorical, obsessive, spammed sleight of hand by the rage bait schizo posters. Sure, it's true that the pearl clutchers are, in fact, pretty weird and bad at being funny, but the rage bait schizo posters can't even bring themselves to care about having the conversation that the pearl clutchers keep trying and failing to start. They can't bring themselves to explain why no boundaries, meaningless comedy is just generally better than, I don't know, saying you probably shouldn't make a stereotype joke and have the punchline be the tired and boring stereotype, not just because it's offensive to random people, but because it's probably just going to be stupid and not interesting. They can't bring themselves to say anything tangible at all. So comedy dies, and the blame is passed on to pearl-clutching idiots so emotional they can't escape ridicule, while frustrated schizo-posting weak men and a few women, etc. desperately seek validation for how not cringe and Twitter famous they are. These impotent dumbasses need to be exposed for the trick they've been turning for years. The explicit deflection of blame that anyone and everyone keeps falling for. Their uniform dismissal of the pearl-clutching comedy police keeps entirely destroying discussion before it begins. It's not enough to remember that the rage bait schizo posters are the actual generic ruiners of comedy, because they're also doing all of this intentionally. I made this video because I wanted people to see how easy it is to view the terrible corporate decline of Hollywood-esque safe comedy as an inevitable consequence of perfectly ineffective pearl clutchers single-handedly fumbling a modern resurgence of comedy, whether in movies, YouTube, or otherwise. I wanted people to see how the behind-the-scenes of pearl-clutching dumbass comedy policing is really just a bunch of doomerous Twitter idiots trying to provoke the most extreme, unnecessary, unrealistic responses from the least measured, most emotional, theory-driven, safe space spammers possible. It's important to remember that neither side of the comedy war is particularly calm or unemotional. Pearl clutchers can be insane too, but also that the doomerous schizo posters on the rage bait side of the comedy war basically just see the other side as an ineffective joke that shouldn't be communicated with. These endless, meaningless nothingness posters are intentionally hiding how little they want to see any actual comedy resurgence. And yes, the schizo posters are right that comedy shouldn't be neatly packaged within boxes defined by a bunch of philosophers and criticized as soon as a phrase doesn't fit some rigid and abstract definition, but that doesn't mean that this comedy hostage situation is any less a problem of their own design. They could reach out to the pearl clutchers, determine what the common social boundaries of offense are, truly act in good faith, but everyone knows they don't want to. They don't want to attempt a revival of comedy because the return to good comedy of the past was never the point. These doomerous schizo posters have always wanted only to wallow in anger and pointless conflict. It's all just kind of stupid in general. Really quick, if you're liking the random, insane comedic and non-comedic stuff I've said in this video so far, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment for the algorithm telling me what you think about all this. Who you think is more at fault in the pearl-clutching, schizo-posting, rage-bait comedy war, how you think this impasse can be solved if you think comedy is actually dead, and if you do, how we can revive it. Personally, like I said, I think comedy in its current state is way too dictated by safe, rigid, theoretical, impossible to define rules that people are tricking themselves into believing are both groundbreaking and ideal. A whimsically perfect setup for the future of non-stop hilarity. Theory crafters forget that most people don't care about about any of it. Any moralized policing of any joke topic, whether it's race, sexuality, gender, nationality, number of Kick subscriptions. There's a disconnect between these trazillionaire Hollywood profiteers, terminally online Twitter users, and the average person who just wants to enjoy the life they're given. Who knows what traits they were born with and can laugh about them along with whatever broadly true or broadly untrue social narratives other people suggest might subsequently apply to them. Imagine a joke said by a man to a woman moment coworker. Why can't Helen Keller drive? He says. Because she's a woman, he concludes. In her article, The Philosophy of a Controversial Joke, Isadora Mosh says this joke makes her laugh, not because she thinks it's inherently funny, but because its punchline is both incongruous with the setup and unexpectedly offensive. She finds herself laughing involuntarily while knowing the joke itself is something she doesn't appreciate in content. I think it's useful to consider that it's possible to find yourself both offended and entertained by the same thought at the same time. To me, this suggests that offense, while important to recognize in yourself, can't be the sole way we determine which jokes are okay and which are unacceptable. With no context, anything could happen to a controversial joke. It could die immediately, make everyone laugh, sustain a productive conversation, or trigger an avalanche of pointless fur affinity drama. Sure, it is the joke teller's responsibility to not kill comedy, to make sure the joke doesn't leave everyone else confused and annoyed. But it's also everyone else's responsibility to not kill comedy, to not overinterpret and overanalyze what someone said
Because a bunch of philosophers meta-theorize that thing actually under the surface perpetuates harmful stereotypes implicitly, blah, blah, blah.
The easy set of buzzwords I can pull from the cliche repository tells me that for all of this, there's just a time and a place.